Here we go, season 5, episode 2, Don't Tread on My Uterus. We are the Libertarian Moms, and we're taking on abortion tonight. This episode could go for a while. Buckle up. When I told Charlie that was our topic for tonight, he was like, really? His eyes just got kind of big. But here's the thing. South Carolina is living under the constant threat of a total abortion ban. And the legislature, the General Assembly just came back into session a week ago. And man, is it hot. This is what they want to talk about. This is what they want to work on. And last year, while we were campaigning statewide office for Jessica and local office for Melissa, this comes up a lot. What do libertarians think about this? What should we do about this? And so we had to formulate some positions on it. And we're just going to lay them out for you. We're going to come at this as moms, as women, and as candidates and libertarians, but mostly as people who don't think anybody has the right to use the state to inflict their wills upon the rest of us. So, opening statements, Jessica. Our show notes are out on the blog. You can follow along with us, but we're going to take this on from a couple of different angles. Visit parentingporcupines.com. Go for it, Jess.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, after the Supreme Court of the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, South Carolina was one of the handful of states that thought it would be a good idea to try to pass an abortion ban, a total abortion ban. And they almost succeeded. Our state Supreme Court shot it down. They said that it was in violation of our state's constitution. It violated the rights of women to privacy in their medical care. And so, as Casey stated, we're still concerned about this because now our legislature full of old white men who like to be on their moral high ground are back in session. They're back at it again. And so there are lots of things that they use to argue for this. And it's crazy. It's just crazy to me.
It's sort of the world we're living in now. Melissa, talk a little bit about some of the expectations here. Like we know that the Republicans and specifically the pro-life Republicans built this kind of stronghold in state legislatures with the idea that Roe v. Wade would be flipped so that they could pass these bills. So like, what does this look like to you as you see this creeping up in the legislature? What are they trying to do? What's the purpose here?
Well, they say that they're trying to save the babies, save the children, but they could be doing stuff that would actually reduce the number of abortions instead of just banning an activity. So, yeah, I don't know.
So they say they're trying to do that.
Much more pressing matters that affect a lot more people that they should be focusing on.
Well, I think so. I mean, if we focus on solely the argument that this is to protect the sanctity of life, or this is to protect the unborn, you have to consider that there are situations where the women's rights are not being protected. And to be clear, personally, I want to go ahead and get this out there. I am pro-life. I have 2 children. Neither of them were conceived under ideal circumstances. In neither of those situations did I consider abortion. I have never been in a situation where I have been told that my life is at risk due to my pregnancy, and I have never been in a situation where I have been pregnant as a result of a violent act such as rape. So that said, personally, pro-life, never been in a situation that would change that for me. But I also don't believe that there should be any ban, not even a ban with exceptions, because if you have a ban with exceptions, then you are creating an environment where women have to have a doctor's note or proof or whatever the thing is. And if we're talking about situations where there has been a traumatic event, that can further traumatize a woman, right? And that could be, again, result of rape, pregnancy as a result of rape, or having to terminate a pregnancy because of a medical issue, a high risk, right? But in those two situations, you have to ask yourself, like those two specifically, I get it. You want to protect the rights of a child. And we can argue all day when you think life begins, right? We could argue that all day. That is a moral issue, in my opinion. But when do the woman's rights begin in those situations? And how do you describe
Make it a
every possible
hierarchy.
scenario where that could be an issue? You know what I mean?
You can't write legislation
You can't.
that addresses every possible scenario. Instead, we write this standard legislation that misses the opportunities to show compassion, right? And completely leaves out these exceptions that are there. And exactly to your point, when you create any kind of ban that has to have exceptions, then in order to receive an exception, you have to violate your own privacy to be able to get that exception, right? And so that, of course, is untenable. We can't support that either. We're already living under a 15-week ban. So it is illegal in South Carolina to have an abortion after 15 weeks. And historically 15 weeks is the quickening, right? It's where 15 to 20 weeks where a woman should know she's pregnant. It gives her a reasonable amount of time to try to come up with, a solution to what's going on. And so we're already living under that ban anyway, which I think all of us would say, like, it's not ideal because once again, you get to 25 weeks, 22 weeks, 25 weeks, there's complications that put the mother's life in danger. I know somebody who had complications where there were two fetuses and the one was not viable, and but to abort the one would have meant to possibly lose the other, and so she had to carry that non-viable fetus all the way through to term. It was incredibly painful for both her and that child. It was incredibly cruel, right? And so when we think of these kinds of medical situations that are exceptions, that are sort of these one-off examples, and they brought them into the General Assembly, and these women told their stories one right after the next, explaining why these bans are not a good idea. And I mean, it was just it was like
heartbreaking.
It was a parade of women that talked about why they needed that procedure and how hurt they were by it and how saddened they were by it. And so I'm just like, to me, we just have no compassion when we're out there saying you just can't do it. You can't.
Yeah. And I don't think this is anything the majority of women go into. Oh, I'll just that's the easiest option.
Yeah.
It's never the easiest option. It's a horrible option.
I don't know I know a few people who have had
the last option they have.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know
the only one they think they have.
I know a few people who have had them, and they've had them for various reasons. I know people who have had them because they weren't in a position to care for a baby, and it was the easiest and cheapest option available to them at the time. I know somebody who had an abortion because she was pregnant by an abusive husband, and she couldn't leave. She was afraid to leave, and she didn't want to bring a baby into the situation. I mean, I know people like I said, they've had abortions for different reasons, and not a single one of them would tell you that they are glad they did it, that they don't think about it
lightly.
Right. And it shouldn't be. And here's the thing, like we talk about like late term abortions, right? Casey, like you were saying, in South Carolina, we already have this very limited window where a woman can have an abortion. Like I was telling y'all before we came on, I've had 2 babies, right? I can tell you right now that women are not out there carrying babies for 6, 7, 8 months and then just being like, I'm going to go have an abortion. I don't want to do this anymore. They're not doing it because having a baby, carrying a baby is a lot of work. Like it's hard on your body. Like it's absurd that that's even an argument that, well, we have to do this because women are going to be out there at 32 weeks just killing babies. Like
just that's deciding they don't want this child
that
anymore.
Is not a thing. And I mean, there might be people out there who do that, who aren't mentally able to be human beings. But that is absolutely the exception to the rule.
I mean, we've seen one-offs, right?
And you can't punish everybody
because
someone somewhere might do something.
And we've seen things where teenage moms didn't know they were pregnant. They give birth to stillborn babies. They hide them in dumpsters, like these kinds of, Hollywood stories where it's like,
Yeah.
but this is not the majority of what's happening here. The
No.
majority of what's happening here is women who, for whatever reason, are experiencing medical complications or financial burdens or lifestyle burdens. Like to your point about the lady that's in a relationship that just is unsustainable, an abusive relationship, right? Like these are all personal choices that women are having to make. And they're the only ones that have to live with the consequences of that decision. They are the only ones. So I don't understand where the state gets off deciding that they need to make those choices for a woman. I don't get it.
It's a decision that's being made by people who have never carried a baby, who have never birthed a baby, who have never been in a situation where they've been raped.
And have no consequences for being wrong.
Much less been raped and become pregnant as a result of being raped.
Yeah.
I mean, like they're legislating something they don't fully understand, and they're doing it based on their morality. And the problem is that people are buying it hook, line, and sinker, right? Like they're just accepting what is said, and it's like, oh, well, this is true because that guy's got an R after his name or whatever thing. And we have to look at this and have these conversations like reasonable people. We have to take emotion out of it. And it is a very emotional conversation. Anytime you talk about, I feel like children, elderly, and animals, people get really crazy really fast. Really fast.
I thought you were going to say they get really emotional. You said they get
really crazy. I mean,
why not?
It gets a little cuckoo pants. And
no, you're right.
Well, because we love babies, old people, and animals.
But it's but it should be something that we all consider an important conversation. But it should be important enough, if we feel so strongly about it, it should be important enough that we try to figure out where the actual problems are, and then how do we actually fix it? How do we resolve it? Because we all know prohibition doesn't work. It never has. It never will. Because you know what? You can go and you can tell doctors, you are not allowed to do this. You can go and tell women, you are not allowed to do this. And do you know what is going to happen? Women are going to be in back alleys getting abortions by God knows who use God knows what, and women are going to die.
So
women are going to die.
So before we go, worst
the war
case
on
scenario
drugs
on the
and prostitution has worked.
I'm going to get crazy now. I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to escalate this.
I think you're making a good point, though, that these things are going to happen anyway, right? And so, and
People
there will be states that make it legal, right? And so in South Carolina, some of the things that happened in South Carolina last year when they were considering this full abortion ban that said to me, this is not about saving babies. One of the things was an addendum in this law that would prosecute women or parents if they took their underage child across state lines to a state that allows abortion to get the procedure and bring them back. They were going to prosecute those parents for child abuse. Excuse me, friend, but no, but absolutely not. If my state's not going to allow this medical procedure for my kid, but I think it's okay for my kid and she needs to have it, I'm taking her where she needs to go to get it. And South Carolina, excuse me, but you can fuck right off. Like, absolutely not. That piece of it says to me that you're not interested in saving babies. You're certainly not interested in protecting my child. What you're interested in is telling me what I can and cannot do. And that, friends, is the heart of this. It's about control.
Does South Carolina prosecute men who go to Las Vegas for a bachelor party where prostitution is legal and they come back to South Carolina? Do they get prosecuted for hiring a prostitute in another state where it's perfectly legal? No, they do not.
See, now that's legislation that would be interesting, right? Because then we also see where drugs are legal in other states, but you can't bring them into South Carolina. You can use them elsewhere. You can buy them elsewhere, but you can't bring them here, right? So you're exactly right, Melissa. Like, there's a double standard. We do have a question on our YouTube listeners. Somebody wants to know, what do you say if a mother wants to abort, but the father wants to keep it? Does the woman still have the final decision no matter what the father wants because it's her body? Good question.
That is a good question. I mean, I don't have an answer to that because I've never been in that situation. I would like to think that they would be able to come to some sort of an agreement on it.
If it wasn't so expensive and burdensome.
Well, I think you have to look at the situation too. Like,
It would help.
why doesn't the woman want to have the baby, right? Like, is that a conversation that's being had? Why? Is it because you don't think I'm fit to be a dad? Is it because you're not ready? If I am able to pay for the medical bills, will you have the baby and give it to me? Like, are those conversations happening?
Counseling. Look at that. Family counseling would be nice. That would help.
And that is one of the things that we talked about, like within our campaign when we were talking about this, because this came up during our campaign because that's when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And then our legislature decided they wanted to act a fool.
Well, but you're right about the parental rights question, right? Because it really does become about parental rights. And the challenge is that the burden of pregnancy, of losing your job or being out of work, right? Being medically incapable of working for that period of time, all of that falls on the mother,
the woman.
And so if there's it's night time. So because there's a disproportionate amount of responsibility on her, not just because it's her body, but because there's a disproportionate amount of responsibility on her, I would lean on her side. But if there's a compromise that can be made through, to Melissa's point, counseling, I think that's reasonable to have parental rights, worked through. But again, you can't do that in 15 weeks or less.
Yeah,
well,
right? And having a blanket rule never works.
And that's also something that is no one else's place to say what should or should not happen. That should be between the mother and the father of that child. Their families, if their families are important in their lives, their families should be involved in that conversation. How can they help? How can they make the situation better so that at the end of the day, what comes out of it is something good as opposed to the alternative, right? So yeah, it is a good question, but I don't think it's one that anybody should answer for someone else, for someone else's situation. And that's not me dodging the question, right?
No, 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 because it goes back to legislation.
Who you're sleeping with. It would help. I'm going to show my, I don't know, my age or my conservatism. You should know who you're sleeping with. If like my husband, we didn't wait till we got married.
But, well, obviously I didn't with either of mine.
It's not like I'm like, don't have sex before you're married, obviously. Right. But like he would know that wouldn't be an option for me when we were dating. Like,
so that's the question.
You should know who you're.
If these are responsible, if we were talking about responsible adult relationships, we wouldn't be talking about banning things, right? Like we wouldn't be asking the parent, the legislature
to make their own
parent
decisions.
us. Exactly. Right. If we actually trusted people to make their own choices and be grown people and do the right thing for themselves and for their families, like we wouldn't even be having this conversation because it would be beyond us to think that the state should fill that role. And as libertarians, it is beyond us to think that the state should live that role because we do think that people can be trusted to make their own choices and should be trusted to make their own choices.
Well, and I think something that is, I think all too often left out of this conversation is, I mean, are we not trusting our medical professionals? Are we not trusting our doctors to make prudent decisions, to give good advice, sound medical advice? I mean, they take an oath to do no harm, right? And doctors are held to a very high standard. I mean, if they screw up, they can be sued in civil court and they can be held responsible criminally, right? So if they're out here doing things that are things they shouldn't be doing with regard to any medical procedure, there's punishment there. So us saying like we don't trust people to make their own decisions, but we're also not trusting medical professionals and medical providers to guide their patients. And
Well,
I think that's something.
Let's talk about that, because these laws are about prosecution, right?
Mhm.
They prosecute the woman for making her choice. They prosecute the doctor for facilitating that choice, right?
Mhm.
That's what it's about. When you create a law like that, the follow up to that law is prosecution of people who break that law. And you're exactly right to say we don't trust the doctors to be doing the medical thing, right? Instead, we plan to prosecute them for doing this thing that we don't think they should have done.
Mhm.
And I just, yeah, all around at the state level, the idea to ban something that's a medical procedure that could be one that people need, and that it quite frankly is none of the state's damn business,
Mhm.
I just think is a bad idea. The other question that Charlie put in was,
Oh, yep.
go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, I was just going to make the point that the state always stays within the teeny tiny confines of where it starts. It never expands
Never.
to creep into other areas that have nothing to do with the initial problem.
Never. They've never done that.
Never.
No,
Never,
they've
not
done
ever.
that. They've never
No.
overreached in any way.
Yeah.
For those of you
You're
who
right.
are new here, that is called
That's
sarcasm.
sarcasm. Big time sarcasm. The other question, and I'm gonna take a stab at it, not just because my husband's the one asking it, but do you believe there's a time limit on abortion if it's not a life or death issue? And I would say that no, we don't believe that that's a thing, because we don't. I think it's a compromise. Right now, when we have this time limit, we have a legal time limit of 15 weeks. To me, that's a compromise between the people who want to ban it completely and the people who don't want to ban it at all. And so from a compromise perspective, if we have to have a compromise on this issue, then let's talk reasonably about time limits. But that goes into what we talked about before about creating exceptions and then putting the burden of proof on a woman to prove that she was raped or that she was molested or whatever, right? So all of these things take us down a path where the state gets deeper and deeper involved and the individual's rights are continually eroded. And so I would go with like, no, I don't think we should make a compromise. I think we should get rid of the bans altogether.
Well, I think we have to trust medical professionals to do their jobs, right?
Yes,
I mean,
I wouldn't think a doctor would abort a baby at 39 weeks. If you're
not
that far
not
along,
unless
we'll induce labor. We'll have a C-section. We will get this child out
Yeah.
of you.
Yeah, I
But
don't
at
know any
39
reasonable
weeks,
doctor.
Why would a doctor make that choice? There's
Yeah,
no.
Yeah. I think those are
After
extreme
a certain point,
circumstances
it
that are
just
used.
becomes moot.
Yeah.
It's hyperbole. I mean,
Mhm.
those examples are created intentionally to over dramatize something and to get people fired up on the one side or the other.
The one time
the
a
other-
year it happens.
Mhm. Yeah.
Assuming that really happens at all. I mean,
I can't imagine
Yeah.
a doctor would do that.
But
here's the
those
thing: if they did that, and a woman felt like she was pressured into doing that, or she felt like the doctor acted negligently and caused that, or took advantage of her diminished mental state. I mean,
Pregnancy crazies, yes.
Again, I've
Pregnancy
done
brain.
this twice. I have carried and birthed 2 children, and I just can't imagine being at 38, 39 weeks and being like, kill the baby.
Yeah, we're
like,
done. Yeah.
And if a doctor's doing that, like, there's obviously that is gross negligence. Like,
Right.
I mean,
yeah,
it just doesn't happen. It's just not. I wouldn't even say that happens once a year. I can't imagine that happens at all.
But again, those conversations are built out intentionally to demonize doctors, medical professionals, to demonize women who even and to say, well, we need we need to limit this and limit that. And all of those limitations are overreaches of government and are looking for prosecution of individuals making their own choices about themselves. The last question here, what do you say specifically to other women that want to ban abortion? We had this conversation offline because we think it might be a whole other episode because, and I'll come at it from a position of, I don't ever want to judge another woman and her perspective and why she has the perspective that she has. But I will say that most of the women that I've talked to who are on that side, who want to ban abortion, are on the side of saving babies. That's their That's their continue refrain. I want to save babies. I want more babies. I want to save babies. And I would say to those women to find more productive ways to do that. Like
But they've been
offering,
told this is how you save the babies.
I mean, well, I'm not
It
going to
might
say
be a
they've been
little, it might be a
manipulated.
little
I'm not going to say they've been manipulated and brainwashed and told that
intellectually
they're,
lazy might be the better word. It's just
But-
a little
I mean,
intellectually lazy to think this is the only way to save the babies.
So I think here we are in the middle of this, right? Like in this conversation. So we've got these really extreme scenarios that are used to prompt this reaction one way or another, right? And it's this very passionate reaction. But in the middle of this, what we're losing is where the actual problem lies, which is for normal women under, no medical risk or
violence,
extenuating circumstance, right? Who get pregnant and they're not ready. Maybe they were being reckless, or you know what? Maybe they tried and maybe what they tried failed. I mean, it happens, right? Birth control fails, condoms break.
Just ask my mom.
Let me just, I'm
Love
sorry.
you,
I've got to sidebar here. And I've got to tell y'all, every time somebody, I'm looking at you, men especially, say in this conversation, well, she should have made him wear a condom. It takes every bit of what little restraint I have in my body, because we all know I don't have a whole lot, but it takes every bit of it not to look at you and tell you that I wish your mom had made your dad wear a condom. Okay, just gonna say that. So
smack you in the face. Yeah.
That said,
First
don't
of all,
come
she
at
shouldn't
me.
have to.
Don't
You're
come
a
at me.
grown-ass man.
But here's the thing. So we have these situations where women find themselves with these pregnancies that are either unwanted, they're unplanned for, they are in crisis. Like, this is a crisis for them. And what we are not talking about is how do we actually help these women, right? Because I can tell you right now that standing outside of an abortion clinic with signs that tell them they're going to go to hell, that's not helping. That's not helping. So what do we do? Like, what do we do as communities? What do we do as neighbors, as human beings to
Seriously,
help?
what would Jesus do?
What do we do to help?
Care of them. I'm serious. If you're standing outside telling them they're going to go to hell, just ask yourself, what would Jesus do?
Yeah.
He would help them.
Well, but no ban that our legislative body puts into place is going to fix this. It's not going to get to the root of it. And so this is where I think we need to be looking. This is the conversation we need to be having. How do we help women in crisis? How do we help families in crisis, right? And we've talked about it a little bit. What do we do to make adoption more affordable for people? What do we do to make it a more a reasonable and more available option, right? Because that's huge. And
how do we enable
ends.
these women in crisis to carry a pregnancy to term and not have it completely ruin their lives? I mean, we're talking about women who are in college and have to drop out. We're talking about women who lose their jobs, whose parents turn them out of their house because they're not married. Like, you're not wrong. It's fully a crisis. And these are the women that we're talking about. How do we help them? How do we create support systems to get them back on their feet after they've put a child up for adoption, after they've gone through this trauma?
God forbid you have to have a C-section. My C-section, the cheapest one was $35,000.
Yeah.
How do we create funds that offset medical costs for these women? And don't have health insurance.
Well, and how do we talk to our kids? Like, what can we do? Can we work with community centers and churches to create this age appropriate, independent curriculum where we work with kids who
But you know what? The teen pregnancy rates are declining. They're at the lowest they've ever been, right? So in terms of like the typical sort of scapegoat story, those teen pregnancy rates are lower than they've ever been. So those things are working, right? Outreach is working. Awareness is working. Those kinds of things are working,
Education.
right? And it becomes, okay, well then if if that does slip by, right? Like if it does get passed, okay, then all right, now what do we do? How do we help these kids in crisis? And we have a friend
Over
that
the counter birth control.
has a 14-year-old in her home right now that's a foster kid because she got pregnant and she just didn't know any better. She didn't know what the heck she was doing, right? Got pregnant, got turned out of her house, ended up in foster care, and now she's being fostered by friends, right? Like this is that's the kind of thing we're talking about here, is where when they need help, they need a support system. What does that support system look like? And I think to answer Charlie's question about do you have ideas to improve the discourse, it's got to come from a place of compassion.
Empathy.
Compassion for everybody involved, for the mother, for the father, for the families. Like you can't just have compassion for an unborn baby.
Yeah.
You can't be out there,
It's
you know,
not a
with your
vacuum.
signs
Yeah.
and you're picketing and you're shouting and you're pointing fingers and accusing and all that. You can't be about it from that perspective only. You've got to have compassion for everybody involved in these crises.
Because it sucks all around.
Yeah. And as a society, if all we're
Yeah.
doing is banning it, thinking that that's going to fix it, I mean, come on. Come on.
Because you're not fixing, because you're not actually fixing the problem. You're not providing an actual solution. You're just being a dictator.
Yeah. You're covering up the symptom.
You went a couple of syllables longer with that than I thought you were going to. You're just being a dick. Right?
No, sorry.
I mean,
I've already
you're just
given
being
you
somebody
guys
who's
my
demonstrating no compassion for the various experiences that these women are having, right? Instead, you're lumping them all together as one, you know, sort of finality. And that's just not true. It's not accurate. It's not going to work. It is a waste of our legislature's time. And more than anything, it's so divisive that we can't ever come to a solution on this that's going to fully solve this problem unless we come at it from a place of compassion.
Absolutely.
That's my word on that. All right.
Yep.
This has been our abortion conversation. Don't tread on my uterus. Any final thoughts, Melissa?
No, really. I think my only final thought, because it drives me insane and I see it more than I should. And I'm hoping it's a joke every time. But I don't think it is. Men who think that pulling out is an effective form of birth control. I don't know why they think this. It is not. Stop thinking that.
It doesn't work.
That's my final thought. Men
work.
and women, if you think that's an effective form of birth control, you are very, very wrong.
Look at Casey's face.
Please stop.
I can't.
Yeah, that's my final thought. It was a left field tonight. I don't know.
High note. I think my final thought would be, I'm gonna rein this back in. I think my final thought is, for anybody who's watching who really wants to fight about this, I think I would encourage you to take a moment and reflect. Maybe go back and actually listen to the things that we're saying. And if this is a topic that you feel so strongly about, if it's something that you consider a passion enough so that you would alienate your friends and your family over it, I would encourage you to contact your local churches, your local clinics, and ask how you can help. Ask how you can be part of the actual solution. Close up your laptop, put down your cell phone, log off of Facebook, and go do some actual work, because that's where you're going to make the biggest difference. Not pounding your chest, not screaming at us about being baby killers or being, what is it? What was that called? A radical feminist. That was what I was called, right? Yeah, because of
Stop being a keyboard warrior.
So go be part of the solution. Seriously, there are plenty of places that I'm sure would love to have you volunteer. So
yeah,
go do some good.
I think that's a great parting note. Full show notes out on the website, parentingporcupines.com. I would just say, in all things, we should come to solutions in compassion and in community, and we should leave the state out of it. So that's my final thought. Thank you, ladies, for tonight. We'll see you all next week. This has been Parenting Porcupines. We're the
Bye.
Libertarian Moms.